Have you ever had a kind of person, maybe a group of people, a class of people who, no matter how hard you tried, no matter how determined you were to be loving, no matter how resolved you were to be friendly and compassionate and gracious and Christ-like, that you just can't stand them? I'm not talking about like an individual person, but like a group, a category of people. That whenever you interact with people like this, whenever you're around them, whenever you think about them, there's just this resentment, there's this frustration, this hostility that swells up in you that you can't seem to get past. So I'll be honest with you, for me, those groups of people, those categories of people would be bullies, right? I have to deal with those who use cruelty and threats to try to harass and intimidate other people. That just angers me, right? I have a hard time getting past that. Another group would include those who take advantage of others for their own gain, those who benefit from manipulating people, right? That bothers me. I have a hard time with those people. It would also include those who act as though they are above the law, those who are not subject to the same rules as everybody else, right? That really, really troubles me. Those kinds of people get under my skin. Like, it's hard for me to think kind thoughts about them if I have to deal with them. And I don't think I'm alone in that. The truth is, I think all of us probably have groups of people that we have a really hard time thinking and speaking and acting toward with genuine friendliness. Like classes of people that maybe even cross the line into detesting them, despising them. People that we don't want to hang around, that we don't want to interact with. I don't know where you draw that line, what it is that gets under your skin. Some people that I know draw those lines politically. I know personally some Republicans who would rather be set on fire than hang around a Democrat. I know Democrats whose only interaction with Republicans is screaming and accusation. Some people absolutely hate those of other races or ethnicities. There are professing Christians who cannot stomach people from other religious groups. Or maybe for you, it's people who have done something objectionable. Murderers, abusers. Maybe you have no patience for cheaters or liars or traitors or backstabbers or manipulators. Whatever activity or identity is that really bothers you. All of us draw those lines, right? We all have those groups that we just do not like at all. Well, for first century Jews, at the top of that despicable, detestable list of people were tax collectors. They were among the most hated people in Hebrew society. And there was a good reason for it. If you know anything about that culture, about sort of biblical history, tax collectors were Jews who were employed by the Roman government. Now keep in mind that the Romans were a foreign, oppressive, occupying force. So to be in their service was like committing treason against your own people, against your fellow countrymen. And here's the part that the tax collectors played. The Roman government would establish the tax rate for a particular region. The people would then bid for the right to collect those taxes for the Romans, and the government would sell that right to the highest bidder. So the winning bidder had to collect the agreed upon amount and hand that over to Rome, but anything that he gathered over and above that amount, guess what he could do with it? Whatever he wanted, he could keep it for himself. And there was no rule on what he could tax or how much he was allowed to collect. Now, you had certain fixed taxes like the poll tax or the land tax that were set by the government, and so there wasn't a whole lot of room to manipulate those. But then you had duties and tariffs. We know about tariffs, right? Right now in sort of the moment we're in with our nation. So taxes for using roads, taxes for docking and harbors, taxes on imports, taxes on exports, sales taxes, taxes on using a cart where each wheel of the cart was taxed. That was a thing back then. You still have the same thing on a toll road, right? See that sign that says, "We'll charge by the axle"? And it was all like a breeding ground for extortion and exploitation. And the worst part about it is it was legal. The tax collector could stop anyone at any time, force him to unpack whatever he was carrying, and then tax just about anything he wanted. And if the individual couldn't pay the tax, then the tax collector was like, "I've got a deal for you." The tax collector would then loan them the money for the tax at an outrageous interest rate, and there's nothing that the people could do about it. They couldn't vote out the old regime, vote in a new one. They didn't go to the polls every 4 years like we have the opportunity to do. If you like someone or don't like someone, they were stuck. There was no appeal, no filing of protest. The population was at the mercy of these trained extortionists who often traveled with thugs and enforcers to make sure that you paid what was demanded. It's kind of like the mafia, right? So it's understandable why people like this, why men like these were so hated. They got rich by cheating their own people, and Rome granted them the authority to do it. They were loathed. They were the last people you would want to be around. They were the last people that you would want to be associated with. Nobody liked them. They were also the last people you would think Jesus would spend time with. But in Mark 2, we're going to see that Jesus did exactly that. So if you have a Bible with you, turn to Mark chapter 2, verse 13, and we're going to read together Mark 2, 13 through 17. Mark 2, beginning in verse 13. The Holy Spirit speaks to us through Mark when he writes these words. And speaking of Jesus here, it says, "He went out again beside the sea, and all the crowd was coming to him, and he was teaching them. And as he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, 'Follow me.' And he rose and followed him. And as he reclined at table in his house, many tax collectors and sinners were reclining with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. And the scribes of the Pharisees, when they saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, said to his disciples, 'Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?' And when Jesus heard it, he said to them, 'Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners.'" Now, most people might catch a glimpse of a tax collector as they walked by and immediately have negative feelings and make negative assumptions about that man sitting there at the tax booth. They wouldn't have any reason to spend any time gazing at him or thinking about those cheats and those traitors. It wasn't worth it. But Mark tells us Jesus, as he's continuing his ministry of teaching about the coming of the kingdom of God, that it is in your midst, it has come among you, as he's surrounded by crowds and masses, It says he saw a tax collector named Levi. That word saw means more than just caught sight of or glanced at out of the corner of his eye. It indicates a careful, deliberate look. Jesus observes Levi. He pays attention to Levi. We might say he checks him out with a purpose. It's like the first day that I ever saw Catherine when she walked into that seminary classroom. It was not a casual glance. I watched her. I looked at her with purpose and intentionality. I singled her out. And that's what Jesus does here. He consciously singles out Levi and focuses his attention on him. Honestly, if you've ever been looked at like that, it probably made Levi a little bit uncomfortable. Right? Here's a tax collector, and there's this guy just sort of eagle-eyeing you from across the way there. But it gets even weirder because Jesus walks up to him, and instead of saying, "Here's my name, what do I owe?" or sneering at him or hurling some insult at him, Jesus walks up and he says, what? Follow me. 2 words. Follow me. He calls Levi to become his follower, which is shocking because who is Levi? What is Levi? He's a tax collector. He's hated. He's despised. He's the most unlikely candidate for being a follower of a religious teacher. He is guilty every day of dishonesty and corruption and extortion. He doesn't deserve to be singled out like this unless it's going to be ridiculed and judged, right? Deserves that. Doesn't deserve this call from Jesus, this up-and-coming popular rabbi, to come follow me, but that's exactly what happens. And I want you to see a few things here. First, Jesus initiates the encounter. He doesn't stand over to the side with a sign that says, "Whoever wants to follow me, come on." He doesn't wait for Levi to come to him. He comes to Levi. He approaches Levi. Jesus reaches out. Jesus makes the first move. Jesus seeks out sinners. Second, Jesus doesn't limit his call to the seminary trained or the morally upright or the spiritually disciplined. He calls everyday sinners. He calls the socially outcast. He calls the despised and the despicable. And then third, this call isn't to be one of Jesus' 12 apostles. That's going to come later. And Levi, also known as Matthew, will be one of those. But right now, at this point, this is just a general call to come and join Jesus' cause, to be his follower, which is the exact same call that is extended to every single one of us. Levi isn't unique here. This isn't some rare, distinct calling. This is the same call we received when we heard the good news of Jesus. Follow me, right? So how does Levi respond? What does it say? It says he does 2 things. What's the first thing? You can reference your Bible here. It says he rises, right? He gets up out of his chair, and then what? Follows. Immediately gets up and he follows. It's pretty simple, right? Pretty straightforward. He doesn't argue with Jesus. He doesn't negotiate the terms. He doesn't say, "What exactly are you asking me to do?" He doesn't sort of work a price or say, "Well, let me get somebody to cover this for me." Jesus says, "Follow me." Levi gets up and he follows Jesus. But I want you to understand that in doing that, he makes a decisive break with his old life, with what he had been up to that very second, sitting in the tax booth, collecting taxes, Jesus says, "Follow me." He rises, and the first step that he takes away from the tax booth is a break from his old life. In fact, if you read this same account in the Gospel of Luke, it says that he left everything and followed. And that word "followed" is literally translated "was following." From that point forward, Levi was following Jesus. It became the continuing pattern of his life. So it wasn't a one-time deal. It was a substantial sacrifice, in part because he was probably wealthy, right? Because those tax collectors could add on whatever charges they want, and they did. So number one, it was hard because he was wealthy, but also because once he left, there was no going back. Now, some of the ones who had already been called, who were already following Jesus, Peter and Andrew and James and John, does anybody know their profession? They're fishermen, right? If the Jesus thing didn't work out, what could they do? Go back to fishing. They had a safety net. Not Levi. Once you walk away from this, once you turn your back on the job that the Roman government has given you, when you leave for good. No second chances, no plan B. He is all in at this point. He abandons his former way of living, his former way of thinking. He walks away from every other loyalty. He gives himself and his future and his security to Jesus. He doesn't know where this path is going to lead, but he's in, right? Commitment, dedication. So different from the way that we often call people to follow Jesus now. Now, the most you might get is to ask somebody to walk down an aisle or pray a prayer. And they do that, and then they fill out a card, and then we stand them up in front of the church and present them as believers. And even if we never see them again, and even if nothing in their life ever changes, they might be convinced that they are fine and safe and secure and saved because they did what we asked them to do. I fear that perhaps we've communicated that following Jesus is just a one-time decision that you make. That's a lie. That's unbiblical. And it has given hundreds, maybe thousands, maybe millions of people a false assurance that they're going to heaven when their hearts may have never really been converted. Just like Jesus' call to Levi is the same call he extends to us, the way that Levi responds is the same way that we are called to respond. Make a definitive break with your old way of living, your old way of thinking, and follow Jesus from that point forward. Levi apparently has no remorse, no regrets about what he's done. In fact, he throws a party. Some commentators believe it was to say farewell to his old life. It was like there's a last big blowout to show that this isn't me anymore. He invites all his friends, all his fellow tax collectors. And by the way, all the tax collectors were friends with one another because nobody else would be friends with him. So he invites all his fellow tax collectors and friends, spends a lot of money on food and servants for one big blowout banquet. Now, first of all, this feast is a celebration of what has happened to him. When you think of a feast, what do you think of? You think of laughter, you think joy, you think excitement. In just a second, we're going to feast, and I hope that I hear conversation and laughter and joy coming from these tables. And that's entirely appropriate in this case because a transformed life is cause for rejoicing. Even more than a birthday, more than a wedding, more than a retirement, more than watching the Super Bowl, a person's conversion is reason to party. A person's transformation is reason to celebrate. It's a life that has been rescued from hell. We celebrate that. We ought to, shouldn't we? We should get excited about that. A sinner has been transformed into a saint. Someone has been brought from death to life, from darkness to light, been adopted into God's family. We should rejoice in that. It's a celebration of God's grace that even the most unworthy has been welcomed in and made part of the family. Secondly, the feast is for Jesus. It's to celebrate what's happened in Levi's life, but it's to celebrate, or it's for Jesus. He is the guest of honor. Levi has a desire to highlight Jesus as the cause of his changed life. He's a new man because of Jesus. But this party is also for the sake of Levi's friends. He has a deep, burning desire to share the good news that has changed his life. He wants his friends to experience what he's experienced. A heart that has been changed wants other people to know that same joy. And so he fills this house with sinners and tax collectors like he used to be, because they need what Jesus has and what Levi has received. Now, let me also mention here the significance of this being a feast rather than just a casual gathering or some sort of meet and greet. In that culture, eating with someone was entering into intimate fellowship with them. To invite someone to share your table was an offer of peace and trust and brotherhood. Shared food was a picture of a shared life. And so when Jesus makes the choice to eat with these people, he is sharing himself with sinners. He is entering into fellowship with people that nobody else wants anything to do with. He is sitting down and getting close to the undeserving and the unworthy. He's identifying with them and sharing his life with them. That's great, right? Well, unfortunately, not everybody thought so. The Pharisees did not share Levi's excitement. They did not share Levi's joy. They simply saw an opportunity to complain and accuse. You know people like that? Just take every opportunity. They don't want to share joy. They don't want to delight. They don't want to rejoice. They just want to point fingers and complain. Now you need to know that the Pharisees were experts in religious law. They were the protectors of holiness and righteousness as dictated by the law. They were the rule makers and the rule keepers and the rule enforcers who advocated salvation by separation. In other words, they taught that you become acceptable to God by staying away from anything or anyone impure. Impure behaviors, impure foods, impure places, impure objects, and worst of all, impure people. You keep yourself clean. They're the opposite end of the spectrum of the tax collectors, right? And so these rule experts get word that Jesus has violated their rules by attending Levi's party. He has eaten with the impure. He has communed with tax collectors and sinners. He has fellowshiped with the wrong crowd, the unqualified, the undesirable. He has failed to remain separate. He has defiled himself. He has identified with sinners. It's inappropriate. Scandalous. And it's pretty obvious that even though they sit in judgment against Jesus, They're intimidated by him because they don't go to him and confront him to his face. They go to his disciples to make accusations. But here's the heart of the matter. These men, these Pharisees, they know the Bible. They just don't know how to apply it and live it. Like, they know the content. They know the text. They've memorized much of it. It's just never penetrated their hearts. They know what it says. They don't know what it means. They know theology. They don't know God's heart for people. They aren't concerned with mercy or compassion. I don't know how you get through the whole Old Testament without missing that. They don't care about sinners or the needy. Their religion is superficial. They keep the right observances and the right rituals. They go through the right motions. They're respectable. They're civil. They're dignified. They don't curse. They keep their homes clean. They go to synagogue regularly. They live moral lives. They were good people. But there was no love in their hearts toward the undeserving. And so all they can do is accuse and slander and condemn. But look at how Jesus responds to their accusation. First of all, when they accuse him, they do it in the form of a question. Why does he eat and drink with sinners? They don't really want an answer. It's an accusation. But first of all, Jesus does not dispute that he eats and drinks with sinners. That's kind of the point, right? That's his mission. The reason he has come is not to comfort the self-righteous and the outwardly respectable and the dignified. Jesus didn't come for the righteous. Who did he come for? Sinners. He uses the illustration of a physician to make his point. Healthy people don't need a doctor. You don't get up in the morning, you're feeling great, all your vitals are good, haven't had any problems, and you think, God, I probably ought to make an appointment up at the clinic. Just maybe. No, healthy people don't need a doctor. Who needs a doctor? Sick people. Jesus, being the physician of souls, goes to the spiritually sick because they need him. The same reason the doctors in our clinic spend every day with sick people. Can you imagine criticizing Lynn Dingler for that? Can you believe that Dr. Lynn spending all day around those sick people? How dare he? Of course he does. They need him. Jesus didn't come for people who have it all together. He came to save messed up, broken down lawbreakers. And he didn't come to quarantine them. He came to rescue them. His mission is to sinners. And what the irony of that statement is, who fits in that category? Everybody. Nobody escapes that category. Everyone is a sinner. No one is righteous, not even the Pharisees who think they're righteous. Jesus comes to and for sinners, those who know that they're unrighteous. But he also doesn't come to simply accept sinners in their sin. He embraces sinners without embracing their sin. He comes to transform them, just like he did with Levi, right? In that moment when he stood up and he walked away from the tax booth to follow Jesus, in that moment, his vision and his view of God was transformed. His life was reordered to fit what Jesus did in changing his heart and his destiny and his standing before God. All that Jesus did inwardly showed itself outwardly. So I want to finish up this morning by highlighting two real critical truths that this passage teaches us. First of all, Jesus comes to the outcast, the detestable, the guilty sinner. I think we are prone to judge people on appearances and label them and categorize them based on how they measure up to us. Jesus, on the other hand, sees people for what they need and what he can do for them and to them and in them. Jesus shows concern and compassion and mercy toward the unclean and the lost. He doesn't just preach at them, he cares for them. He calls the most vile, most detestable sinners to commune with him, to fellowship with the one who made them and loves them. And while he most certainly offers the cure for our sin through trusting in his life, death, and resurrection, he doesn't demand that we trust him before he loves us and comes to the worst of sinners, right? He comes to us first, and then we change. His extravagant grace towards the most undeserving is scandalous. It's outrageous. It is completely unexpected, and yet it is one of the defining characteristics of Jesus' ministry that he comes to people like that, people like us. So that's the first point. Second thing I want you to take away is this. A very, very real, very concrete application of that truth. We, as followers of Jesus, who have been shown mercy even though we were undeserving, ought to be all the more eager to reach out to those that everyone else avoids. The kid that nobody else likes. The people who are down and out. Difficult people. Unrefined people. Marginalized people. The people who frustrate you and make you uncomfortable to be around. The New Testament community of faith, the church, ought to seek out the outcast, even if the self-righteous disapprove and judge them for it. The truth is, the church is not called to be a bunch of respectable looking, respectable sounding, respectable smelling people. The church ought to be the biggest collection of freaks and weirdos and oddballs and outcasts in the world. Right? Amen? Testimony? Not just a bunch of respectable, dignified people. Jesus came for the worst of sinners. Now, that probably makes us feel affirmed and encouraged when that sinner is us. Jesus came for somebody like me. But how would you feel if that person you can't stand, that person you despise, for me, the bully, the manipulator, the rule breaker, for you, maybe your political enemy, the person of a different ethnicity or religion, the criminal, the cheater, the liar, the traitor, the last person that you would choose to spend time with, what if that door opened up right now and that person walked in and sat down at your table? Would you welcome them like Jesus would? Don't answer out loud. I want you to really ponder that in your heart. The person that just thinking about them or seeing a picture of them or reading about them just stirs up bile and anger in your heart. If that kind of person walked in and sat down across from you, would you welcome them like Jesus would? Not demanding that they change first, that they clean up their act and straighten out their lives first, But if that person walked in the door with a genuine interest, a genuine curiosity about this Jesus and who he is and what he's done and what he might offer them, would you welcome them and sit with them and feast with them and commune with them and identify with them and risk being seen as one of them? Would you love them in the name of and for the sake of Jesus? Jesus sees sinners. He calls sinners. He welcomes sinners. And he fellowships with sinners. He has welcomed you. Will you welcome sinners like he does? If you would pray with me, I'm going to give you a moment. I don't do this every week, but I'm going to give you a moment just to sit with this for a second.